Hi, Philipp, and welcome to this series of talks. We're super happy that you're not only part of these talks, but that you also came with us with this journey with the collaborations, already a couple of series. And this time we wanted to share a little bit more of a conversation over what we have done here in Sociedad Volcánica and also with the work with you and your practice. So I would like to open up with a question. If not everyone is maybe already heard about your work, about what you're doing, but you're very focusing on food, on scent, and experiences. And for this collaboration, you created a scent which is an impossible sheer scent, which in the end it's very possible since you make it tangible. And we would love to hear, how did you translate a volcanic event, something that it's so intangible, into an experience that you can really be surrounded by?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. And thanks for having me not just this time, but it's already, I think, by now the third or the fourth contribution that I could do to the studio's works in the last couple of years. And like just to add of the background of how I work or what inspires me, it's as Andrea already explained, it's usually scent or flavor related, and it's very often about identity of culture, identity of landscape, and how these identities and cultures are shaped through smell and taste. And that was also with all the last contributions to Studio davidpompa. It was always about how is a product, what's the identity of the product or the origin of the product through smell and taste. And that was also this time, it was again the question. I think the biggest difference this time was that it was really about something that usually doesn't have much of a smell, and that's a stone. So that's why, and as if this was not enough, we also started, or the studio also started introducing narratives of geological, like of geology and things that are not just a couple of 100 years ago, but a million, 100 million years ago. So that's why this time we're usually how we called it, olfactory narratives in connection with the products of Studio davidpompa. We often relate to things that are not so long ago. So this time it was also, that's why we called it a sheer impossible scent, because it is a smell that, yeah, who knows? Who can imagine something that from an era or from a time that was, but also involving processes such as geological processes that, like volcanic eruptions, like that was a bit that shape the material also, that create these multiple colors, these different textures, these different. So that was a bit the starting point.
What I really like is the fact that it's like a sheer impossible scent, but you mentioned, like, for example, stone has no smell. Also, like these explosions which caused the cantera happened 1 million years ago, and there are volcanoes that are actually extinct, which makes it even less tangible nowadays. But I think it's super nice, the relationship of heat and fire, which is in a volcano process, so to say, but also in the process you made, which is this kind of incense. I don't know if you would like to describe it, but also how you relate this burning process of the origin of the stone into what became your collaboration.
Yeah, I think what was really what was a really beautiful coming together was this, like a lot of ingredients that are part of the smell were kind of imaginative or very associative, but then the act of burning something and the act that it's not an incense stick, but it's a paper, This was very much inspired by this concept of an archive, this concept of all this knowledge that is kept on paper. I mean, now in our age, it's the computer, but a lot of this data is kept on paper. So that's why paper was a very interesting medium to play with. And it worked really well with smell and something that burns. So there is this force of fire, and this force that links a bit to this to this very brutal and very like beautiful for us, like, or at least for me, it's something I cannot sincerely imagine how it must have, like, this geological forces. It's just out of my scope, I believe most human. And I think that's why it became something very close to reality, something very true to facts, but at the same time something very associative and something very poetic.
Definitely.
And I think that's where also the connection of the studios, of the products, the way the material connects to shape, to space, but also to the whole narrative of the archive, that the archive becomes part of the products and the products become part of the archive, which I think was very beautifully shown during the Milan Design Week.
Thank you. Also, one more question. You work a lot related with taste and smell, and this is more like a personal question. But how do you relate both in your practice? How close, separate are they? And how do you focus on one or the other, or you don't separate them at all? And how do you see this also in your future projects? Because I'm very curious about it.
Yeah, it's a question also myself, or in the collaboration with Susanne, we very often, or I think we constantly ask these questions, but at the end, we don't at the same time, we don't ask them, because it's just, both are so closely connected. And then at the end, the one is dominating there, always according to functionality, or to find the right means of expression in the right context. So at the end, it's the context, or it's the client, or it's the narrative that chooses the medium ultimately. But also, if you make it really large, at the end, they're always interconnected. That's why also, if we talk about smell with the paper, if we talk about smell with the olfactory installation that we did at Sonamaco in 2022, it's not about, smell is one tool to tell a story, but it's also the physicality, it's also the physiology, it's the interaction with the objects. Like, all these elements, they create the experience.
Definitely. I also think it's very interesting, for example, in an exhibition or a space that we have right now, one focuses mainly in exhibitions in what we see, maybe what we hear, what you touch, but scent is something so untangible, but at the same time is something that completely is around you. So I remember people coming here, having another exhibition, relating the scent, and scent is something that it's really embedded in the memory. It's something that it's very emotional, something that is very poetic, and I think it has a very beautiful narrative behind it. As you mentioned, like an archive, even going into an archive, like the smell of time is something that you can touch it, you can see it, but like being surrounded by a scent, I think it's something that really stays like in the memory of people. And I really like that it's another level also of telling this story, and that's why we also are super happy to have this collaboration with you and have all this level behind, like the same stone, like the starting point of it, and how many languages it can have to get to people as well.
Yeah, and I really believe it's never smell, but it's also that's around it. It's the shape. So that's why, in a way, it also feels very natural that there is a scent that is associated with a lamp, which I think is so, yeah, for me it's really exciting to think of why would you would think why would you connect a smell with a lamp, like, but the lamps of Studio David Pompa are made of such tactile materials that have their origin in objects that are in constant contact with our body, and then you transform it into something into an object that is actually not meant to be touched all the time. Then I think the scent really can kind of relink the body with the object.
So my question is, since your work is without words, how would you describe the language that you use in your practice?
I'm I'm not giving short answers, but now I think if I would have to choose for one word, it would be embodied.
Okay.
It's an embodied language, because it's a language that, yeah, and that's, I think, what for me, why smell and taste became so powerful in my practice, or why I chose to focus on it, was also that I recognized how much smell and taste are as much of a language that differs from nationality to gender to age, to as much as words and visual information is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why the question you just asked, I could, it's, you could totally, depending on you as a person, have how much your sensitivity for smell is compared to visual. And I say no visual because I know that you are just by nature, but correct me if I'm wrong, a very visual person.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
that's why, but it's a lot because you trained your eye and you trained your visual sense because of your, maybe of your early interest, then of your education, and now of your professional life. Like, it is something that you keep on practicing, like with a lot of hours each day. And the same is for someone with that focuses on smell and taste. It's like, because you spend so much time with that sense, that at some point it just dominates your perception. And of course, ideally, there is a sensitivity equally according to each sense that we have available. And
I think you describe it very, very beautifully, but it's completely true. It's like almost like being aware or not aware, but it's almost like you're born with a sensibility, but then you invest in your passion, in things that you really, maybe not directly work, but how you live and how you focus your experiences. And that also is embedded or directly influenced in your practice and how you actually have your own language with or without words.
because I was really at the beginning, when I got introduced to the topic of the archive, the topic of the geology department, I think for me that was very intriguing. Like, just out of like personal interest and personal inspiration. But I was really curious, what is it that, especially, and I call it now old and dusty, not to undergrade the amount of culture and data that is stored in the geology departments around the world. But I was really curious, like, what is it that was ultimately leading to this source of inspiration for the product, but also for the exhibition?
Okay. Well, like if I would try to resume it, it would be curiosity, like questioning. Like we started, for example, the idea of the archive, which we presented in Milan last year, started with the lack of information. For example, cantera is widely used in Mexico in architecture. It's really embedded in our culture. It's a stone that it's very characteristic because of all these speckles and all these beautiful colors that it has. Like you can find it like in this case it's white, but you have also like green, orange, pink. And just to see it and to see that it's like a natural stone, it's just fantastic. And when we tried to find more information about it, you couldn't find that much. And the name cantera in Spanish, well, if you translate it one-to-one in English, is quarry, which is almost how you would say like, hey, like I would extract the quarry from the quarry, right? Which makes no sense. So we tried to get to some information, and in the end, we just were standing in front of the geology department of the UNAM University. We arrived with our stones to Juan Carlos, which was our first connection. And we really wanted to know more. So it was this lack of information that started like this research. And we understood, for example, that cantera is a stone that its origins come from volcanic explosions, as you mentioned, 1 million years ago. But these volcanoes, for me, it was also intriguing. How come you have cantera in places like Zacatecas or Oaxaca, where there are no volcanoes to be seen? So I was like, all these little steps led to further questions. And the reason is because they are extinct volcanoes. They happened so long time ago that it's
Exactly.
part of the landscape. And we started with the UNAM University, like the geology department, which led us to the museum, the geology museum, which they have, and it's beautiful. It's really, really nice. And we entered the archive. And as you mentioned, like this dusty place with like notebooks and papers and objects and stones. And I think like from a personal perspective, you said we are attracted to the things that we like. And for me, just entering that place, it was like inspirational, like the first second. You come to this place with information of the country, of the history of the museum, of
Yeah,
stone.
and I mean, you already said it. Sorry to interrupt you, but I was one thing that is really and the one thing that you did not say is like, and this I think is so fascinating because it's like you talk about the material, especially at the beginning. It's like something that is everywhere, and that has been here, that has been at this geographical location since millions of years. It has been used, it has been purposed for multiple things throughout history for many thousand years. So I also see, like, because it is everywhere and we know it, then suddenly this zooming in and realizing this is that sounds like that this was really, that's where a lot of energy and inspiration comes from.
Definitely. It's like you start to see your surroundings completely different. Nothing has changed. It's like it is there for you to see it, but to understand it in a different way. And it's also like Mexican culture, I think it's very, very embedded in all these artifacts, in all these materials, in all these traditions, which we take for granted or we live with them, but we are maybe not questioning enough. And once we start doing it, it just becomes something completely new. It's something that it really motivates us. And what we wanted with this exhibition is to bring this amazing archive, which they have in the Museum of Geology, and transform it into something which is maybe has a language that it's more user-friendly, that it's easier to connect to people. Since I think the other archive, it's amazing, but you really need time. You really need to dive into it. And the people that will be coming here, maybe you have 5 minutes with them, maybe you have a little bit more, but we really wanted to give them our passion and what we share with this people, with Lucero, with Juan Carlos, and try to have a conversation with them, to open their curiosity as well, and to share what we learn on these spaces. But it's almost like being, I would say, like contemporary explorers of things that really makes us.
No, and it's exactly. You're explorers, and I think it's not the first time. Because I could name now multiple other series of products, but I mean Palma for me is another product that is associated with, like, the most famous object is the head.
Yeah.
Like a tool that protects one from the impact of the sun or weather. And then, like, seeing it in a lamp, I think does something to the material, but yeah, it also does something to the culture. And that's where now I have to throw in a question that I did not plan to ask at first, but because now we talk a lot on how Studio David Pompa is kind of interacting with the others, so with other disciplines, with other locations, with other things. How did you experience that exactly this geology department reacted to you and Studio David Pompa approaching them with such a request of using the data to inspire your own practice?
I think it was very interesting because at the beginning you try to explain what you're doing, and you start with, hey, we are doing lamps, we are having this collection, we have questions, and it takes some time to understand, wait a second, what does lamp have to do with stones and research that you're trying to do? So it takes some time, but quickly you realize how it's super interesting also for them, since they are maybe they're more based on research, they're writing articles, they're working with PhD students, they have a very linear, a very punctual way of working, which makes them experts also in their fields. But as soon as you take this context into something completely different, I think for them it's also like it's completely interesting. It's something fresh, it's something new, it's having also interest for their work. I think they're not used to have that much connection with the open public. For example, such a research institute, they kept a lot of articles for themselves or for the scientific society. But for example, the museum is a starting point where they have all what they have been working on, and all the pieces they have. It's like the first contact with the public, which for them is extremely important. But for example, what we did is we created also this completely new context, which allows the same information which they are working on, and in this case, what they are providing us with and giving us knowledge from. It's a new like starting point to have contact with an audience. So for them, it's really attractive to say like, hey, it's the same information, but in which way are you translating it and approaching the audience? Which they were
absolutely,
they were super open now. So we learned a lot from also the Paricutin explosion in Mexico, like so other themes. It's like literally the archive. You open one book, then you open another drawer, and then you end up having new and new questions. So it has been like a really fantastic journey, and I don't think it will end up here. So
no, I can imagine, because it sounds like you just, there's this saying, you puncture a beehive, and then
exactly like that. That's a good way of describing it, but I think that's how it was with them. First, it was like really curious and tried to describe it, and then it was just like open doors.
No, and I think this is really beautiful that you say that you also say that these collaborators, that they feel also excited about you making use of their research. So I think we also, in our practice, when we work with anthropologists or fungologists or microbiologists, like if they see that we use their knowledge and their skills, but in a very different context, but because also in our practice, the goal is always to make it accessible. So we translate often highly scientific data or knowledge or impressions, we translate into something very approachable through embodied experiences.
And I
So
think
it's also,
sorry to interrupt you, but how you mentioned, like, it's very complex information, and there is not only one way of communicating. And we're used to this exactly like dry knowledge, and it's amazing how you can transform this into several, so to say, disciplines. In our case, we did it one way. You were completely different, but I think it's a very intuitive also process, and it's fantastic how you can reach to people in so many different ways.
yeah, and it's the word that you said now that I think is really important is transformation. And I think this, because there is scientific communities or parties that don't want to have their data, their knowledge transformed. So I think it also has to do a lot with openness.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Because it is natural that this information walks through a path of transformation. And the outcome, it can be a million outcomes. And all of them going to be great because all of them going to expand this dimension of this knowledge gained by someone.
Yeah. For example, what you mentioned now, how to translate it, the publication we made at the end, it's like you start with a stone, you transform it, which we also did with a collaboration with Wim van Egmond. So in a way, for example, geologists, how they work, they have this petrographies, I think they're called in English, petrografías in Spanish. So in a sense, they work with two different types of lights, and they are able to see and to describe what is a stone made of. For example, cantera, you have the glass, you have stones, you have minerals. So they see an image like that, and they can, so to say, read the stone. And the way that Wim van Egmond did it, he placed the same petrografia under the microscope, different types of lights, he overlapped them. And then, of course, you get all these new tones, which are the minerals, which are being reflected by the light. So it's the very same stone. You can either present it as a whole, you can see it from the perspective of a geologist, from a more artistic perspective. You can also have it as an essay, like with words, like more poetic. And I think that's the beauty about it. Like you have one starting point, and then you go all these.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah,
so
like
I have to laugh now because you just answered the next question that I was about to ask you about how this whole project and this path of exploration into the geology and into the stones was at the end kind of feeding your visual curiosity, but you gave a perfect example of one of the collaborations that you did with Wim van Egmond, and I think this is just another great example of how seemingly unconventional source of inspiration, like a geology department at the public university in Mexico City, can become a fountain of inspiration, because it's always like a chain reaction. Like as you put suddenly you reach out to a Dutch micro photographer that analyzes and discovers with his own means something from Mexico, and from there it goes back and it contributes to Mexican like contemporary culture again.
And thank you for the
It's
connection, because actually we know him through you, because you were having the event at Mediamatic, and you were having also his videos where you can see like in a time lapse also like the bread and all the ingredients evolving in the time. And
yeah, because
with
because
him,
I
for
think
example,
yeah,
he doesn't
he's
have
more
works or videos of things that are static.
fungi, yeah.
So for him, it
I
was
think
also
for
like
him, I would also love to ask him some time how it was for him to photograph something that is the opposite almost of what he usually does,
Exactly.
because
Yeah.
usually he documents the most small living organisms, and now he had to do with something that, for I think most of us, we would consider it as one of the most dead materials there is. But at the end, I think the photographies or the visual material shows so much life in this material.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's like how to bring the stone to like alive, how to bring it into something that you can touch, you can smell, you can hear. Like we also have the collaboration with Leon, so it's also like the seconds before the explosion. But we could continue with so many other questions.
Yeah.
But I think it's super nice as a starting point also for the people that will be listening to these talks to have like a new perspective on so many different disciplines. So I want to thank you, Philipp, for being part of this one, and looking forward also for the next project together.
Yeah. Thanks again for the continuous collaborations and inspirations,
No,
because
thank you.
that's also important. And yeah, I wish I would be in Mexico now.
So next time, but we will love to have you here as well. The Sen will be here, so you're present.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Philipp. Bye-bye.